welcome to a Friday. Can you believe it's the last Friday in August? I guess technically it's the last summer day, Friday of August. I don't know what happened to the summer, but it's Friday, August 25th, and I'm thrilled to be your host. I'm subbing for Yvonne, and we wish her great success in the procedure she's having today, which has caused her to take, at least she got my approval before before taking the day off. And I'm just thrilled, as I said, to be with our resident historian expert, Jane Curtis. And you're wondering, maybe I didn't join the military or army or whatever, or the Hello Girls, but Jane.
Looks good on you, though.
You like that? I might keep it. I don't know. So Jane's going to talk to us about what this signifies and why I'm wearing it, and who in the world were the Hello Girls?
Well, the Hello Girls were not sort of UFO, or USO, I mean, or the Red Cross canteens, World War I. They had nothing to do with the nursing corps. There were just none of the things we know about the yeomanettes for the Navy, no connection there. But what does hello mean? Well, they were not the off-color girls, no, they weren't that either. What do we associate hello with?
Hello.
The telephone. They were telephone operators.
The old-fashioned, though, right?
The old-fashioned original plug-in, plug-out. Right.
Wow.
Hello, a number, please, and all that. Yes, and they got into World War I and played a very important role in that whole thing. General Pershing, when the United States entered the war in Europe, which was April 1917, was dissatisfied with the communications. And of course, in those days, radio existed, but it wasn't what it became later.
Yeah, radio had just started.
Yeah, and of course, we're going to see a picture in a minute of a little bit of something of that. Carrier pigeons played an important role. Dogs played an important role, but nothing could take the place of voice communications over a telephone. So General Pershing decided, or somebody suggested to him or whatever, we've got telephone operators. And sure enough, we had mostly female by this time, telephone operators. In the 1890s, when the telephone became bigger, and Bell was going strong, the Bell thing was all founded, there were a lot of women. It was a genteel occupation, and women could teach school, or be nurses, or very few things in those days.
So were they still secretaries? They weren't secretaries back then yet, right?
There were some.
But it was still
But anybody big and important, of course, always had a male secretary.
Right.
So they, some of them were actually called, just jokingly, sort of hello girls, I understand. But in this case, it was not a type person or or a job or a real characterization of anybody. So Pershing suggested that, and they put out the call for women who were bilingual. They had to know French as well as English, because they were all going to be stationed in France. Well, 3 of them were placed in England, but you had to know French because so much of the communication, and the Americans were on a front where they were dealing with the French, I guess, more than the British, at least for a while. So they did. They got 7,000 responses, and many of those were no good because the people weren't bilingual or anywhere near it. But 450 of them wound up being taken into the Army, into the Signal Corps, whose piping you are wearing right there.
The Signal Corps.
Yes.
Cool. And in France, or just?
Well, they were recruited in this country.
Okay, so they started in the U.S. and then they would go wherever they were told to go.
There are 3 or 4 names that are important in the field we have never, of course, heard of before. Grace Banker was the chief operator of the whole shebang. And there was a lady from Montana, one of the early people in the Rocky Mountain telephone setup. She was from Montana. Her name was Merrill Egan Anderson. And she was in on it, and she was the one who later pushed. They did not get their rights. We'll go into that later. But she later kept that fight
Now were they technically part of the military? Or?
Well, we'll just get into that.
All right, I have to just
yes,
cool my
because
just.
No, because they were, but it's a good question, unless I forget to bring that in. They had every single, what would you say, characterization of being in the Army that any soldier had, any male soldier or anybody. They were assigned to military units, in this case the Signal Corps, which handled the communications. They were subject to military justice. They were trained. They had rules. In fact, that's a funny thing. They had 10 extra rules that the men didn't have to make sure they were of moral character. Ooh. And who was the least likely to be moral in these situations?
So I don't know if we want to go into
no,
that.
No, we don't want to go into it.
I'm pretty sure everyone
But I'm just
guess.
mentioning that to show you that they suffered through a lot of this stuff and still put on a great performance.
It almost is like that, the woman who played softball, you know, in the women's league during World War II, they had to have this very strict standard of, you know, conduct and all.
Yeah. Well, we might look at a picture or so, because let's do that. Let's just start out with number one here, the communications. Stringing wire was probably the main one at that time, and as you can well imagine, that was a dangerous, dangerous occupation. So, and they're walking over the duck boards here. These are the duck boards in the mud and so on, just like I was inside the trenches. But there they are, carrying these big things. They're going to string a wire somewhere, and of course they'd get blown up, and you could even shoot through them sometimes if there was heavy rifle fire.
Now, would these be the women or the
no,
men?
these
or
are
both?
men.
These are men
carrying.
doing it. So.
And General Pershing he decided it was going to be women in this thing rather than men. For one thing, he wanted the men out there doing the heavy lifting.
Duty work.
Yeah. And for another thing, he thought that women were probably better at it. Well, women can concentrate probably and focus on something like that longer than some of these young, particularly young men, you know, wanted to be out shooting a rifle or something. But no, these are men carrying out, and they're you can tell they're in the sort of no man's land area. They're in the front lines. In the next picture, we see a picture of one of the carriers, and we did a show on that some years ago,
right.
Carrier pigeons, that were delightful. And they could do wonderful things like save surrounded units, get the word back, because most of them did get back. But that was, of course, not going to take care of all your eventualities. And when you're in the middle of a battle, of course, these birds would probably not even survive. So that was another thing. And then the next picture shows there was some use of radio. And I don't know whose forces these are. It doesn't look like American stuff. But you can see that there's a little setup in the back of a truck there.
And the guy's wearing headphones.
Yeah, and highly mobile, but highly delicate. And you can imagine the quality of the reception in an area like that. So that's pretty much what they were depending on. The next picture will show us a unit of these women standing to attention, wearing the original uniform, which was this dark blue thing with this kind of sailor boy open collar, hideous stuff. But General Pershing inspected them. A friend of mine used to call him Perishing, and I'm always in danger of saying Perishing instead of Pershing. But they were trained at Fort Meade, Maryland. Now, most of them were already trained telephone operators because that was a part of the recruitment. But for those who weren't, but who were fluent in French, they gave them a course in, you know, what to plug in where and how to tell. And it might be any of you who know Fort Meade, Maryland. It was called Fort Franklin at the time. But this is the end of 1917, beginning of 1918. And that building looks like typical Army base construction. So there they are, standing instruction. I have a picture now. I think it's the next one. Yes, these are the first 6 ladies who went over, and these were some.
They almost look like they're French personnel. Their uniforms don't.
Well, the uniforms were getting better.
I know, but they don't look American. You know what I mean?
Well, a great coat, yeah. They eventually were shifted over with everybody else to the olive drab, but there they are, ready for business. They
look quite serious.
Yeah, they do, and they They were there for, one of them, in fact, was a pianist, and she had been making her living playing the piano with a band. And after the war was over, she survived the war, she went back to doing that, but also being into technical telephone stuff. And she was offered a job in the equivalent of USO, traveling around entertaining, and she said, "No, sorry, I have work to do." Allegedly her famous words. But they were...
And they look awfully young.
They were. These women had to be bilingual, and they were supposed to be telephone operators, and the age of 25 was given as really the top, because they didn't want them older than that. And they didn't want anybody who was married to a soldier stationed overseas.
Because that would, of course, distract them.
I suppose, yes. But there was a pair of sisters. They were French, but their mother was a widow and had married an American, and they moved over to the United States, and they were recruited. They were only 18 and 20. They did full duty. So we've come around again to this point of whether they were really in the Army. They really, really were. All the regulations applied to them. They could be court-martialed, the whole shebang. But we'll hear more about that later. But now the next picture will show us this is a whole group. This is the first group that went over there. They are either in France or they're in Chaumont. Chaumont was where Pershing's top headquarters were at the time, and it was not yet on the front. Later on, many of them were transferred to the front line in the big battle of Saint-Mihiel, and it's 1918 by this time. Things ground slower.
So they're not technically behind the scenes. Some of them are, but they would
Some
be
of them
right
are
on
right
the front
out
line.
there. They're whatever you'd call it, their exchange, even caught on fire from bombardment. They were under bombardment at one time, and the chief operator in that group wouldn't leave. They were ordered to leave, get out of that building. The building's on fire and so on, and she wouldn't leave because she said there's still messages coming and going that I have to put through. And they threatened her with court-martial if she didn't get out. So she got out, but an hour later she went back in because the fires were under control, I guess. But they were really honest-to-goodness war. They were right there in it.
So did they have guns too? Were they
No, they weren't armed.
So, but they're on the front lines.
They weren't armed.
So they're dependent on the soldiers around them to protect them.
And I guess that's one reason maybe they were a little nervous in top headquarters saying, get out of there, because you can't defend yourself. Or you can't defend yourself from burning up either if the fire, suddenly took a turn. But in all, 450 of them got over there, and they were stationed in 75 different places in France. And that tells you something. Some of them must have been alone on duty, but 75 into 450, you see, doesn't let you have 8 or 10 operators on each station. But they bravely went through it all. They had 3 over in England, I think, just receiving things that had to be in French. And
so by receiving things, the messages, they were written messages that they would then...
Telephone.
So someone would call them and say, this guy's, the front's crashing, or it's,
whatever it is,
we need this.
We need
and
this
then they would take that message.
And the message would be passed on, Or the message might be so-and-so was killed or incapacitated, quick send another colonel or whatever was required out to us if you can. So they were stationed in many places. They were very brave, as this one shows. They didn't anything get away from them there. But let's have another picture now. I'm going to show you what it looked like. This was at the top headquarters at Chaumont, and this is fairly early before the headquarters moved closer to the front. But there they are. There are 8 or 10 of them sitting there. At least they had comfortable chairs, and they're doing their thing. And of course, the headquarters would have a super lot of traffic with all the fronts going on, and of course they're liaison with the French, and the French were telling things, and vice versa, and keep passing information to them. The next picture is actually one that shows right after the war at the Paris Peace Conference, and you can see it's in an old palace or building of some kind there. But you see the telephone operators sitting over there in their typical position, and in the foreground here on the left with a long skirt is the top elevator person, or top telephone person of that group. And over behind her are these two ladies that I imagine are the ones that are seeing to it that the stuff got forwarded. They were responsible, ours were responsible for getting it in, and the others were for passing it on or seeing that it got taken care of. Another picture here, the word is getting around. This is the Stars and Stripes, which were, of course, the newspaper was already in existence at that time, the military one. Signal Corps colors adorn hats of new bilingual wire experts. And you are wearing, this is not original, this is a World War II Signal Corps cap.
So they
the
continued
color stayed the same. It was this orangey color. And there were differences. If we have time and you want to, I have written down here all the exact variances in their insignia. But they all wore the Signal Corps insignia, the flags. And they all had some kind of armband showing what type they were. The highest of anybody was a sergeant in rank, no officers, which is, again, kind of a crime. But because they also went through military drill, by the way. That picture of General Pershing, or when he was inspecting them, shows you that they didn't just sit there, and learn to plug in. They were out there marching around under some drill sergeant. So, but here we have, anyway, Signal Corps colors adorn hats of new bilingual wire experts. They have sergeants too, and they had this one anyway. And then we had this bottom message at the bottom here. So, the next picture. This is one of their posters, and you see the YWCA, back our girls overseas. So they weren't just leaving them out and saying, "Oh, go back our boys," but they were saying, "Back our girls too." And here's this really spruce-looking gal, and she either it's a fake uniform or it was early on when they still had navy blue, but this is a much more attractive, than that
drab,
weird thing they had on before,
grayish, greenish,
and a nice
whatever
cap.
Mm-hmm.
And then another poster we have that is quite a striking one. It's a kind of takeoff of the Statue of Liberty with a telephone. And most of us who dwell at Green Spring, that's the kind of telephone we grew up with. And when the dial phone came in, it seemed like something out of the movies. People in movies always had dial phones.
That was before my time, Jane.
I know. But this gives you a little idea of what it was like. And the Hello Central, there was a popular song based on the phone, but it was one of those tearjerker songs. The little kid is calling heaven and said, "I want to talk to my daddy." And of course, daddy is in heaven, that's why the little kid is calling. But there was publicity about it, in other words, to some extent, and they used it, I think, in recruiting. I don't know if they could recruit any. I never found that they'd recruited any more for that actual corps or whatever you call it.
So after the war, they did get full benefits for.
They didn't.
So they weren't.
That's a tough story.
So they didn't get of course, the GI Bill wasn't until after World War II. But
they didn't even get status as veterans, which was one of the key things. But they all got home, expecting some praise, and one of them got a medal. One of them, after the Germans mounted their last big offensive in March in 1918, and these ladies were just, getting into full gear getting over there and getting going at that point. And some of them were sent to the headquarters, which then, is back in the Marne Valley. But then things got very hot. And the Germans, it was their last effort, and there was some very fierce fighting. When the Americans first went in, of course, the French and the British and the Germans were exhausted by this time, after almost 4 years of that. But here come these full-blooded Americans, and the fighting was very stiff. And the Saint-Mihiel offensive was a famous one. Our headquarters were moved to, the one with the general in it, I think, was moved to north of Verdun, and all of the fighting went on, and of course all of the communicating went on, and the front would shift occasionally. People would be cut off, and would come back. They even, I think, occasionally, one or two cases where they actually called in air support, which was not common. Mostly the airplanes were attached to an Army unit or a Navy unit in the British case. But they, at any rate, there's this terrible fighting going on, and these ladies are doing their thing, carrying on. None of them got killed, which was good.
Pretty amazing.
There's plenty of proof that they could have very easily gotten killed. But they arrived home, and most of them, I think, were repatriated fairly promptly. And some of them were expecting, of course, at least recognition. Nope, not a thing. And the government was defending it on the basis of all these regulations are written with the understanding that it's for males. Nothing in here says anything about females. No. So they were.
That's really interesting, considering the women have participated in, I'm pretty sure, every single war that we've had, back from the Revolutionary War, right?
Indeed, they have. In fact, that would be an interesting thing for us to talk about.
We should talk about that.
It's on
going
my
back
list.
to Martha, the First Lady, going to the winter camp every year during the Revolutionary War. But I do want to ask, now, did the Germans also have this ability? Were they doing the same thing on their side?
They also had wire communications, yes, but they did not have any women in the Corps. Somebody put that bug in Pershing's ear, and with him behind it, of course, they sort of had to do it. But in the 20s, now, most of them, or at least half of them, stayed on after the armistice because communications, of course, kept on, repatriating the soldiers and worrying about the wounded, and getting the German prisoners back home and getting the other ones back in the West. So they stayed on, and they'd come home 1920, and right away when this wonderful lady, this Merrill Anderson from Montana, that really got her between the eyes. This is just dead wrong. And as of 1930, she really took the bull by the horns, and she was making every effort you can make to get Congress to pass a bill to recognize these women as veterans. Everything else would fall into place if they did that. The medical care and everything. It was not until 1977, that Jimmy Carter got behind it and actually signed the bill that declared that these women, and only 50 of them were left by that time.
So that's like 60 years later.
That's like 47, but almost 60 years since the war, right?
Right.
Yes, yeah. So he signs the bill, and let me see another picture, please. I think it isn't going to be, yes, the next one. Now, this is a lady whose name was Olida Jour, and Olida Jour was a French-Canadian, and she later married an American named Christidas, a Greek-American, but she is standing obviously in her own home, and this tall general from another American group who got a short end of the stick. He was an African-American, this general. And you see that the two guys in the background are just kind of slunching around. They're not showing any respect at all. But he is handing her, either this is a recognition paper or a certificate. That I couldn't find out because there was another picture of a formal ceremony. But he was actually sent to her home, flags are up and all that, and there she stands. And she was one who did a lot she was one of the top people in overseas there, and she came back. So the next picture will show you the formal ceremony. It's not a very good picture, but that's her husband, of course, who was tickled to death. Her husband was a Treasury representative in Paris for a long time, so she went back to Paris. They lived in Paris for 8 years, and she is the one, by the way, who played the piano in nightclubs and things.
Right.
And at the time of the war, of course, she played the piano and all those marvelous old World War I songs at the time she was stationed there, for the troops, just to entertain people there and for her own release, relaxation. But people would still recognize her in Paris. The word would get around, hey, isn't that one of those women that was, oh, yeah. And, play Hello Central, or play over there or whatever it was. So things kind of tied together. So, but they did eventually, after 50 long years, get this recognition.
That just blows my mind, but
yeah,
I guess it's not too surprising when you think of things.
But on that they recognized the fact that they had done this wonderful service, but that they made an excuse, a feeble excuse.
Well, I think they did that too. They being, I'm saying the U.S. government, I mean, they took them forever to recognize the Indians and their contributions during World War II, especially. And,
the code.
Right, the code. Didn't we do a show on that too, or?
No, I wanted to, but for some reason Eck didn't want to.
We should. That's another group that we should.
Good, I can do a show on that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and those people were long-suffering. The women were long-suffering too, and of course the African Americans, it was only Harry Truman that integrated them into the Army, and they were over there dying and so on. There was one, or was it two, French pilots, or American pilots who were, there might have been one serving with the French forces, because before we entered the war in 1917, several, particularly pilots, nobody wanted to be in those trenches. But the air service, dangerous as it was, and it ruined your hearing and everything else, but that was glamorous. And of course you could do a good deed. But there were Americans over there doing that. Americans, I mentioned the pilots here. Of course, the pilots also participated in some of the birds, the pigeons. And incidentally, it's mentioned in one of these things about the women. The one bird, his name was Cher Ami. This bird was a male pigeon, and there was a cut-off unit, and they had nothing left except one pigeon. And it was pouring rain. I think flooding was the reason they were cut off, I think. But it was pouring rain. Everything was just sodden, their clothes and everything. They had one bird left. So they said, well, we'll try to dry it off. Well, of course, nothing was dry. And they did try to dry the bird off enough that it could take off. And it missed the first takeoff, but it turned around and faced in the direction it was supposed to go and made it off the ground and got back to London. And I think it's in the Smithsonian at this point, because it got back without one eye, without one leg, but the message was still, on its leg, attached to its leg. And that little bird got back. But I think they stuffed it later. I think it's in the Smithsonian. Share I mean. But the ladies, at any rate, you could do anything with word of mouth. You could talk about it. And those little phones you see in the movies, the old world, they wound them up like that, and people got killed all the time, Signal Corps people laying wire, because the wires, of course, were very vulnerable, not only to some weather, but to, bombardment, for instance. 2 days bombardment, or 24 hours, whatever, and then an attack. You can imagine bullets flying and so on. But they would, several cases I actually read about where there was a place where the lines went around a corner and it was open, it was not protected. And of course the Germans had sharpshooters trained on the place all the time. This guy showed a head, for about 2 seconds. And they said that happened all the time. So these ladies, nobody knows how many lives they may have saved.
I would think quite a bit.
This kind of thing, that's right.
You know what?
What?
We have to say goodbye. So do you have anything last that you would want to share with us for these courageous? There were 450.
And 7,000 had applied. And I suppose they were ruled out because of not being bilingual or...
Didn't know how to pull those cables or cords.
But the only ones who got any actual training in the cords were those two that I mentioned, that I knew about. But the others all did. And of course the others their neighbors on either side, they could take care of it. But that's a lot of bravery. It sounds like a gay mad adventure at this point, and I'm sure it was. get out in the world. But still, it was dangerous. And you know, just living then and crossing the ocean on a ship was the only way. And in fact, some of the equipment that's mentioned was supposed to reach them first. It was in a ship that was torpedoed, so they never got it, of course. So they had to make do with the equipment. The equipment looked pretty good in the pictures, but they were up to it. They were up to handling it. And what was it, 3 days, I think, virtually no sleep during that San Miguel offensive. One closest to the front lines was doing that. But so we really, I think, you can take your cap off to those ladies, yeah.
Yeah.
But,
well, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought this to our attention.
yeah, a real.
Right. We'll keep plugging along. I'll look forward to next month's topic.
You want to do it next month, or do you want to do the
I don't. September we can.
I have a couple other things planned.
You have other things planned. I keep feeding Jane ideas.
We'll do it
but,
soon.
One of them, I'm just going to mention, the one about the Russian ladies. Did you get that one that I sent recently? A very interesting book that just was released about the women in World War II, the Soviets, and the contributions that they made. And when you talked about morality and stuff, when they came back, they were like shunned because, you know, you were in the war. You were in, you know, you. Anyway. We'll get to that eventually.
Hats off to
hats off to all these
Yeah.
great, courageous women all over the world. Thank you, Jane.